From strength to strength, you call me strength. To strength, you call me strength. To strength, you call me home. From strength to strength, you call me strength. To strength, you call me strength. To strength, you call me home. You call me home.
Open your Bibles to Luke chapter 22. I've been working on my Thanksgiving meal for weeks now. Food for giving thanks, good news, things to think about, the kind of stuff that doesn't get into the headlines because it's not tragic. It's slow, it's subtle, it's good stuff like the rising of the sun. You know, if the sun didn't rise, that would be tragic. It would hit the newspapers, banners, breaking news, the sun did not rise. Of course, if it's that important, everyone would know it. It's tragedy. But a lot of times, good news, like the rising of the sun, it's just, but it's happening, good stuff happening. Last week, I mentioned to you something that is wonderful news if you love kids. The news is that while a couple hundred years ago, 44% of children died before they were 5 years old. Almost half the kids that were born died before they were 5 years old around the world. As of last year, less than 4% of the kids around the world, they're born, they make it to 5 years old. That's pretty wonderful when you're a parent, that your child survives to 5 years old. Once they hit the teen years, you wonder, I don't know, but no, you don't. You're always grateful. We go through some rough spots, but one of the reasons why the child mortality has done such tremendous things, especially over recent years, is because of, how about this? This might get controversial. I hope not with anyone here, but with immunization. You know, when my son David was born in 1980, there were only worldwide only 22% of the kids in the world had access to any vaccination. And I remember it was hard as a parent going and taking him in and getting the shots, but he got his shots and he lived and he survived and all of that sort of stuff. But that was just in 1980, just 22% of the kids around the world could get a vaccination. Now, over 88% of the children before they're 1 year old around the world, over 88% get at least one vaccination. And that's either really good news or it's a global conspiracy. And just Google that. Just Google that and you will go crazy. Because that's the world we live in. It's crazy. You will see all sorts of stuff. That it is a global conspiracy, and there are people who will absolutely believe that. And I don't even want to go there because that's bad news. But the information age is also the misinformation age. Science works. Rockets go up, they get there. We have been to the moon. Good science is good statistics. It works. Children are living. I got my flu shot last week. I'm not selling them. But at any rate, I think it's great news that over 88% of the babies around the world can get at least one vaccination. So many needless deaths have happened because of sickness. And how wonderful it is that I still work with patients once in a while that are post-polio, that when they were kids, they had polio. Polio's been almost eradicated, smallpox, all these things that have been eradicated. If it's a global conspiracy, it's a good one. Anyway, enough of that. That's good news. A lot of good news like that happening in the world. A lot of good ways to get involved with these things. It's not just, oh, it's good news. It's have hope. Because as bad as things are, sickness is still bad. Death is bad. There's a lot of bad things, but it can get better. It has gotten better. Good news is always great hope to keep on going. Now, last week here in Luke chapter 22, we talked about the band of brothers, and it's not about the disciples or the men themselves, it's about the man. It's about Jesus, who is the band of brothers. Jesus is the one who holds us together. Jesus is the living bond. He's the loving band. He's the elastic band that the way he holds us leaves a lot of freedom, a lot of flexibility, a lot of room for foolishness, a lot of room for fighting, like the disciples themselves did, but still he holds them. And sometimes when you watch the way the Lord holds us together, you say, well, Lord, why aren't you more rigid? Why don't you enforce the rules? Why don't you make them do this or make them do that? Wouldn't it be good if you just stepped in and did something? But you know what? He's doing things all the while. We just don't seem to recognize how he works and the way in which he works. And that's what he's trying to tell the disciples. Look, I am the band of brothers, and I'm holding things together with this loving, elastic way of working with you, giving you plenty of room to be foolish if you want. But you'll also find that I've not changed. And you can repent, and you can return, and you can be healed, and the family can be whole. And that's the way in which he holds us. Like we sang a little while ago, hold us, Jesus. He does. He's holding us in a way where you may not feel the warmth, you may not feel the hug, you may be a little frustrated that he's not stopping someone else from doing something else. But the fact is, the Lord is holding things together. And the Lord is bringing us together. And the Lord leaves us with a choice, because love always leaves us with a choice. And so we see here in Luke chapter 22, Jesus, the band of brothers, talking to these men, talking to us. Verse 19 there of the chapter, when he had taken some bread and given thanks, he broke it. He gave it to them, saying, "This is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." In the same way, he took the cup, and after they'd eaten, said, "This cup which is poured out for you is the new covenant in my blood." His very body is the bond that holds us together. And he gave us the symbols. And he said, "Behold, the hand of the one betraying me is here with me on the table, for indeed the Son of Man is going as it has been determined, but woe to that man through whom he's betrayed." And then they began to discuss among themselves which one of them it might be who was going to do this terrible thing. But then there arose a dispute, a fight among them as to which one of them was thought to be the greatest. And so as we looked at this last week, suddenly this fight breaks out, but the band is not broken. The Lord is still there. Who would blame him? I certainly wouldn't if he just walked out and said, "Forget it, I've had enough of you guys." But no, the band of brothers does not break, even though they might want to do harm to one another, and we're doing harm to themselves by their very attitudes. He still holds them. Hold us, Jesus. And he said to them, you know, the kings of the Gentiles, they lord it over them. And those who have the power, those who have the authority, they call themselves benefactors as they lord it over them. But he said, it's not going to be that way with you. Let him who is the greatest among you become as the youngest, and let the leader become like the servant. And so he shows them the way in which he holds them, not like the people in power around the world. They hold power in a way, and they may rule with a rod of iron, they may hold with an iron band or an iron wall, but the Lord says, no, the way it's going to work is that my power sometimes won't even be perceived. I will become like the least. I will become like the youngest, taking the back seat oftentimes, but I'm still here. And if you want to look for me, you'll see that I'm always here. And as he tells them this, that you know how it works in the world, it's not going to be that way with you guys. Please understand that everything Jesus says, he does. He doesn't tell them to do something that he himself doesn't do all the time. And when we look at how the Lord lived, that's a high bar. I couldn't possibly accomplish those things. I couldn't possibly be as he says to be, not in my own strength. but everything that he says, everything that he commands, he himself will do, and he is our high bar. He's the one who will lift us up. Just bear that in mind always. I try to point it out always. It's so easy for us to take the promises, those high promises of God, and make them heavy pressures on us. Because we think that now I have to do that thing. The thing he says to do, the thing that he says he does, now I somehow, in my own ability, have to do it. And wow, talk about the pressure. But when you see that, no, it's not a pressure for you, it's a promise to you. And yeah, it's a high and heavy thing. It's a holy thing, but God is the Lord in a way, not like the worldly rulers who just say, perform, labor, work makes you free. They make slaves out of you. You serve the system. Our God himself is a servant. It works in an entirely different way. Jesus is Lord. Put it on your bumper sticker. Put it on your T-shirt. Jesus is Lord. Make that your preaching call. Jesus is Lord. Go to a place where they don't know Jesus and just start screaming, Jesus is Lord. You missed the point. What do you mean he's Lord? Because a lot of other people are going to hear that and they go, yeah, I know my governor, I know my boss, I know my king, I know my Lord. You telling me that he's going to be pushing and shoving and forcing things in the same way? Of course Jesus is Lord, but he doesn't lord it over in the way that worldly rulers does. He doesn't make you do things and say, you'll be glad I made you do it. I forced it. You didn't want it, but I'm making you do it. It's for your benefit. I am your benefactor. Praise me. Some people preach Jesus as though that's the way he is. He's not that way. He's Lord, but he doesn't lord it over. He doesn't tell the disciples to do something that he himself is going to do. He doesn't work that way. Yes, every knee will bow. Every tongue will confess that Jesus is Lord, but that's not going to happen by compulsion. It's not going to be the way a mafia boss might make every knee bow. We'll just break your kneecaps. We will make your knees bow. We will make you say what we want you to say. When every knee bows and every tongue confesses that Jesus is Lord, it won't be. It can't be by compulsion. It'll be by compassion. It'll be by confession. It'll be by the heart seeing something of who he is and something sad about who we are. And looking to him, the one who sits on that throne is like a lamb slain. And every knee bowed and every tongue confessed to that one that looks like the lamb slain, repenting and proclaiming he's the Savior. He's the Lord, but not lording it over. And the goods that he wants to give us can't just be given to us. I'm your benefactor. I will just give it to you. It doesn't work that way. And so when Jesus tells his disciples, don't do that, understand he doesn't do that. He says it's not going to be that way. He says, verse 26, it's not so with you. Let him who is the greatest among you become as the youngest, and the leader as the servant. He's describing himself. He's the one who's being the servant there. He says in verse 27, who is greater, the one who reclines at the table or the one who serves? Is it not the one who reclines at the table? And that's, of course, the answer in terms of the way it works in this world. The one sitting there at the head is, of course, he's the big cheese. He's the one with the drumstick. He's the one that you're the... And yet Jesus said, look at me. And maybe even then he was still wearing that towel like an apron, having washed their feet. He says, you know how it works, but look at how I'm working. He says, behold, I am among you as the one who serves. And all of them knew, even though they argued over who's the greatest, they all knew Jesus is the greatest. They all understood that. They truly were, they loved him. They were his disciples in that sense. He's the greatest. And he said, look at me. Look at the way I live. Look at how I act. He says, I am among you as the one who serves. And that wasn't only at that moment. Yes, it was then, and maybe he was wearing the towel, but understand that's his nature and that's who he is still now. And so when we say 2 or 3 gathered here in his name and he's here with us, he is here with us as a servant. He is still in the same way here to help us. He's here to serve you. Not like Aladdin's lamp, rub the genie and here's what I want, oh Lord. We've heard enough jokes about the Aladdin's lamp and the three wishes and how that may not be what you wished for. I think we ought to, by now, know enough about our own problems to understand I don't need more power. You add more power to a problem, you just got an extra powerful problem. He's here to help us, not like Aladdin's lamp, not like a genie in a bottle. He's here to help us as a servant in the best sense. He's here as somebody who really understands you, knows what you really need, knows what would really help you. He's here to help you, to serve you as your closest friend, as your dearest, most loving brother, as your everlasting Father. He is family. And he's here to serve in that sense. And knowing that, again, it doesn't put the pressure on us, man, I have to perform, Christians are watching, the world is watching, God is watching. No, Jesus is here. And he's here to help us. That's his nature. He's the greatest in that sense. And he said, and you are those, verse 28, you are those who have stood by me in my trials. Now this is new ground. Up to this point, we've looked at it for a few weeks, and that last line, Jesus is here to serve, amen. But this one, I can't give it an amen, not to start with. I read that, and Luke alone has this verse. Luke alone has this one statement where Jesus said, and you are those who have stood by me in my trials. And I say, whoa, 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 whoa. Judas hasn't even left yet. You are those who have stood by me in my trials? Who? Who's he talking to? When? How have they stood by him in his trials? Decades ago, I put a question mark in my Bible. Those are the best notes I have in my Bible, the question marks. What's he talking about here? What does Luke mean? Why did Jesus say that? You are the ones who have stood by me in my trials. And from there he says, you'll sit with me at my table in all of the heavenly reward. And we'll get to that in a moment. But that statement, you are the ones who have stood by me in my trials. I'm going to spend most of my time here focusing on that this morning because I think I'm starting to get it a little bit. Kind of like the dawning of the day. I think the question mark is still there. I put it in ink. But I think I'm beginning to see a little bit more what he meant. You are those who stood by me in my trials. In many ways, I'm glad, in my own selfish ways, I'm glad that these 12 men were kind of goofballs. In a lot of different ways, I'm glad. I'm not in competition with them. I think they're better men than me in so many ways. But I'm just glad for all of the failings that I see in there, just because it gives me hope. I'm glad for the fact that they often fought, that they often disputed, thinking that each of them was the greatest. I'm glad they had their doubts. I'm glad they would fall asleep. I'm glad they at times would just fall apart. Because if these guys had been people who lived some saintly life, if they had lived in a way up there, I would have felt like, how in the world could I ever live up to that? If these are the kind of people that Jesus would call to be close, how could I ever be one of those who's close to him? That's the way it works in the world, but I rejoice in the fact that these guys, in some ways, I feel like, yeah, I could do that. I mean, I have done that. Some of the bad things and some of the places in which they've fallen. And yet Jesus says, you are the ones who have stood by me in my trials. And at times I've thought that, well, maybe he's just trying to encourage them by saying something almost like, I'm going to find something and magnify it, make it more than it really is, and almost a little bit of flattery. Like that will encourage you by telling you that you guys are awesome. Kind of like the coach will, this team has not won a game all season long, but come on, you can get them, you're great, we're number one. No, you're not. But you don't pump people up with, sometimes you pump them up with a lot of hot air, okay? But not Jesus. No. Couldn't be. He never flatters. He will never encourage us with a lie. He will never get us hopeful and then say, well, really, it wasn't that, but it helped. It made you feel better. No. Please understand, somehow this is true. And if he says something that seems too good to be true, or that's almost flattery, no, there has to be a truth to it. And so when he says, you have stood by me in my trials, I think, how did they? I see his trials. I feel like oftentimes they were the cause of his trials. The fact that they were nearby, that was the very thing that caused him the most grief. And it says they stood by him in his trials. And my first thought is typically musical. It's just, I'm sorry, that's just the way my brain works. And when I think, how have they stood by him? My first thought always goes to the words of the psalmist who says, if the sky above us should come tumbling down, or the mountains should crumble in the sea, I won't cry. I won't cry. No, I won't shed a tear. Just as long as you stand by me. Stand by me. I think that's what we're going to title this message. Stand by me. Stand by me. Jesus wasn't singing that. Jesus wasn't saying that. If the Lord is looking to lean on us, we are headed for a black hole. So he didn't mean that. He wasn't saying, when I really needed you guys, you were there. Because the one time that he really seems to have needed them would happen later that night, and they weren't there. The one time he says, could you just stay awake? That's not a very high bar, but they couldn't even do that. So, okay, he wasn't saying, you stood by me when I really needed you. So that's good. Because if they did, I would feel like, man, I'm doomed to fail. But the fact that they failed gives me hope. So he didn't mean that. And if you keep the context, which is always a good idea, he said, I am here, the one serving. You didn't recognize it until I pointed it out, but you all know I'm the greatest, and I am here serving, and you have stood. I have served, and you have stood. It's a cause and effect sort of thing if you read it that way. I have been serving, you have been standing. In other words, how have you stood? By me. The fact that I have served you, the fact that I have empowered you, that's the way in which you have stood. Wherever you've done well because I am your staying power. The staying power of disciples isn't true grit. It's not something John Wayne would have. It's Jesus Christ. Someone we can all have if we want him. And I will help you. By me. You were made. All things came into being by him. By me you were made. By me you have stayed. By me you've been held. By me you have stood. You have stood by me. Not by might, not by power, but by my Spirit. By the Spirit of Christ, you have stood. And in that sense, we all stand by him. We all stand by grace. We all stand because of him in that sense. And moreover, where some translations have you stood by me and may prompt a wrong way of thinking. Other translations, I think the King James has something about you've continued. The Greek word is simply you stayed. You could have left, but you didn't leave, you were just there. Maybe like a lump on a log, but you were there. It's kind of like just hanging in there. And in that sense, they did, because at times they had choices. And we sang a song from one of those choices earlier. It's in John chapter 6. And there in an earlier time in their lives, many of the disciples, John tells us, they walked away on that day. Jesus was saying some things hard to hear, hard to understand. Rather than just wait and be patient, they figured it was time to walk. And so many disciples walked on that day. Jesus said to the 12, do you guys want to leave as well? Love always leaves you free. You've got a choice. And Peter said, I don't know where else we'd go. You've got the words of everlasting life. Your words have helped us so many times. It's not that they understood his words at that moment. They just understood that wherever we've been helped, it's been your words, and where else are we going to go? And so they hung in there. And that's not a really high bar. That's something that I can do. Just hang in there. Just wait. Just realize you've been helped by him in the past. Have some hope that he will help you in the future. But it's a loving choice. Love leaves you a choice, and then as a choice, not like I'm going to force you to stay, you'll thank me for it later, I'm your benefactor. It's, you know what? You can go if you want. That means that if you want, you can stay. And if you stay, you're going to find great benefit because you've made a choice of love. And loving choices are huge. Don't ever despise, don't ever think small upon any choice that's made in love. It may be like a mustard seed, it may be teeny tiny, but it's huge. Giants, like giant sequoias, grow from that little seed. Love is alive. And a choice to just hang in there, to just wait, to just do the next loving thing, to just trust the last loving thing wasn't a waste, it wasn't foolishness, and just to keep taking the course that love will dictate to you. Not as a tyrant, not saying you have to do this, just saying, do you want to do this or do you want to do that? And if you follow the voice of the Spirit, if you follow the voice of love, you'll find amazing results. And that's what he promises. You know, the disciples, the 12, like so many other disciples, could have walked away there in John 6. If they had walked away, if they just said, you know what, Jesus said we could go, we don't have to stay. There were those times they went back to their fishing. If they went back to their fishing or tax gathering or whatever else, if they had walked away, what would have happened? I mean, I'm going to have to just kind of, based upon what I know of Jesus and his character revealed, I'll just make some guesses about what he would and wouldn't do. What do you think? As they walked away, you think Jesus would have thrown stones at them? Do you think that Jesus would have said, yeah, well, you know, just wait till next time you need me? Do you think that he would have held a grudge? Do you think that he'd been mad? Do you think that if they walked away and then decided to come back a day or a year later, he would have said, well, fine time for you to be back? I think we've already read enough, Luke 15 and the story of the prodigal son and all of these things. If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. Don't we know enough about Jesus to know that he would have loved them just the same if they'd walked away? They had a choice. They could have walked away. But what would have happened if they'd walked away in chapter 6? If 2 or 3, if Peter and John, if Andrew, if a couple of them walked away, what would have happened? He would have loved them the same, but they would have missed chapter 7. In chapter 8, and however many chapters they weren't around for, be a different name in there. Wouldn't be Peter, it wouldn't be John, it'd be somebody else. But they would have missed those chapters in their own life. The chapters of love, the whole book will be written, and Jesus is in every one. But we can miss chapters in our own book, because once they chose to go forward with him, his book became their book. And now I'm in chapter 7, and I'm in chapter 8, and it's part of my story. And you know, as much as the Gospels mean to us, you know, when you get to the heavens, I'm sure John and Peter and the ones whose names are in there, they're going to love their Bibles more than we do. Not because they're still thinking, I'm the greatest, look at how many times my name is in there. But because they'll say, that was my life story. I got to be there when he went through this and went through that. And I didn't catch it at the time. I didn't have a clue at the time what a foolish person I was, but he loved me. And that's part of their whole life story. And this book is all the more precious for them who lived more closely with it. And that's just the way it works. We may not be written in this book, but there's a book being written. And if you bail out on loving choices, if you're just waiting to be coerced, I'm waiting until someone catches me or forces me and then I'll do the thing. Once you no longer have a choice, it can no longer be loving. You may now pay your taxes. You may now do the right thing in your marriage, but it's no longer love because something forced you to do it. When the hand is forced, no longer can the heart be moved by love. And you can go back to 1 Corinthians 13 and the whole thing of all the big stuff you can do, and if there's no love, it's nothing. So our whole lives hinge upon those little choices, those little loving choices where we can do what love would have us to do, or we can just do what we feel like doing at the time. And whenever we walk away, there's something that we lose ourselves. Some part that could have been, but no longer is. And if you think about it, I hope you do. It's more important than anything else. It's not learning the rules. It's God, help me, teach me to love. What happens to me and with me on the freeway and in the line at the store and with people, whoever I'm with. That's the most important thing. What kind of attitude am I going to have? Life is given as a gift. You didn't ask for it. Maybe some of you would like to give it back. I didn't ask for this. Life is given as a gift, but it grows as a choice. Little choices at a time. You know that regarding a lot of things. You can't just give it to them. I mean, yeah, why doesn't the government give me more? Why didn't my parents give me more? Why didn't God give me more? You got this, how come I don't have that? But we all know, don't we, that things are not just things. You can have two things, the exact same model, the exact same kind, the exact same color, exactly the same. But don't you know from your own life how different it is? When this is something that you dreamed about, and something you planned for, and something you worked at, and something you waited for, and something you sacrificed, and you scrimped, and you saved, and you finally got it, and you got it. And maybe somebody else gets the same thing. But if all you love is things, then you might be envious and say, oh, they got the same thing, they didn't have to do all that. But if you love more than just the thing, if there is a labor of love involved in getting that, you realize it's so much more precious. It's so much more valuable to you because I thought and I planned and I worked and I waited. And that's the things of life. It's not just hang in there because God likes to make people suffer, and if you suffer long enough, you'll get out and then you'll get some goodies because he's happy you suffered. This world is filled with suffering. This world is filled with troubles, but it's also a treasure chest, and there are beautiful things that can come out of this world. If we don't fold under the pressure of problems, hang in there. Life is worth it. It's worth hanging in there. It's worth making the loving choices. It's not just things. God just can't say, here, you're in heaven, I'm going to give you all this stuff. It's not just about crowns. It's about working something into your head and heart. And so it won't be the same. Stuffed animals are just stuffed with stuff. All that stuff. But like the Velveteen Rabbit will tell you, love makes you real. It's not just the stuff. It's not just, man, I'm going to put up with a lot of stuff here, and then I'm going to get a lot of stuff there. You don't understand heaven. And though you may be transported there, heaven's not in you yet, so you don't understand it yet. It has everything to do with love. The love of God for you and the love of God that can work through you. So hang in there. All those places where there's trials and tests and where you want to just give up. But whatever love would lead you to do, hang in there. Because these are the trials of Jesus as well. And there's great reward. And I can't tell you what it'll be, but whatever it is, it'll be just yours. Because you waited. You trusted Jesus and you just hung in there. You know, weddings are beautiful. I've performed many of them. And nowadays it's usually a grand performance. It's a pageant. It's bridezilla. It's all of this, you know. But even at best, it's kind of a show before the main event, because the marriage is the thing. And you hope that their relationship together might be somewhat as beautiful. It certainly can't be as carefree. It won't be as gilded, but you hope for something good in that relationship. Weddings are fine, but you know, a golden anniversary, a couple who's been together for 50 years, that kind of celebration is so much different. You look at the bride, oh, she doesn't look the same. You look at the groom, oh man, what's he been through? You ask them their counsel, and they might give you some true wisdom with a little laughter as well. But in that banqueting hall, after 50 years, what you see is, in fact, many of the attendees are the very people, kids and grandkids and great-grandkids who wouldn't even exist if these two had not stayed together. If they'd not decided, you know what, I want to bail. I want to just say forget it. But you know what? I'm going to hang in there a little bit longer. And that's an earthly testimony. And I'm not saying that, please don't understand. I'm trying to make an analogy of promise. This is not about your marriage and something that went wrong somewhere in your life. I'm just saying, though, that whatever you do, as far as it depends upon you, I do hope that you make the loving choice, whatever that would be. I hope that you walk in love. I hope that you hold to love, because that's the picture of a couple who's been together for 50 years, is that so much of their celebration isn't just a hopeful what if. It's something seen. And in the heavens, you'll see that every decision you made, every time you felt like bailing out, but you know what, love told you, no, don't do that. And you did something different, you said something different. You're going to find every one of those seeds is a garden. You're going to find that it's huge. And that's what Jesus is trying to tell his disciples. Look, I'm not the kind of Lord who can just lord it over to you, lift you up into heaven, give you a lot of good stuff, and say, be happy. I'm not your benefactor. It doesn't work that way. I work within you and leave you lots of choices. You can be as foolish as you want. And nowadays you can get online and you can find a whole tribe of fools to join you. You can be as weird as you want, and you will find whole groups of people who will support you and say, yeah, our way is the right way. But there's only one way. It's Jesus. And following our brother Jesus, following the love of the Father, these guys had hung in there. They weren't heroes, but they were in chapter 7, chapter 8, chapter 9, and how precious it was. And when you get to the table, he says to them, you stayed with me there in the trials, you will sup with me at my table in my triumph. And that's the way it works. He says, you are those who have stood by me in my trials, and just as my Father has granted me a kingdom, I grant you that you may eat and drink. This is not, my Father gave me a kingdom, I'm going to give you a kingdom. Some translations read that way. Wrong. If he gave you a kingdom, you would destroy it. It's not about, I want a kingdom. He has got the kingdom. He gives to us the ability to sit at the table. And he will serve us. Even there at the table, he says he's the one who serves. But he says, the Father has granted me a kingdom. I grant you that you may eat and drink at my table in the kingdom. And you know, you say, well, won't everybody be at the table? Won't everybody have food? Won't everybody have the same stuff? Maybe, but you know, it won't taste the same. It can't taste the same. It has everything to do with what we do here. He says, I served you well, and thereby you stayed all along. And because you stayed, you will sup in my triumph. But you're going to find the things that are sweetest, the most savory, the most wonderful stuff is the stuff, not just that by magic, poof, look at that, wonderful food. No, it's the food that comes from the choices you made. And it's personal. It's always personal. The most important things in life are personal. That's why so many things, don't take it personally. It's not about you. It's just the way it works. It's the system. It's not about you. But when it comes to love and God who personally loves you, and you as a person, you have a choice to say, Lord, I want to love you back. Even if I don't see others wanting to support me in that. You be my support. And you walk in love with him. The personal things are the things that always mean the most, forever. You know, I like the pumpkin pies they serve at Costco. I like them mostly because they're huge and they're cheap. They're big, they're cheap, and you can buy a whole bunch of them. And I like them because they taste pretty good as well. But they'll never be as good as my mom's pumpkin pies. And I don't know, maybe the ingredients are the same. And my mom often burnt the pumpkin pies. But they'll never be the same because my mom didn't make them. And I can never have. Well, not yet. But when I sit at the table, I want one of my mom's pumpkin pies in heaven. And I want to say, thanks, Mom. And that's just personal for me. It's not about a recipe. It's not about, oh, gosh, maybe I can find out what her recipe is. It's a personal connection. And same with my wife's cooking, and same with so many things where you put that ingredient of love, and it's not on the package, and USDA hasn't commented on whether it'll give you cancer or not. But the fact is that if you are in that relationship, it's not something that, Marie Callender's can say, baked with love. I can taste it. No, that's just marketing. But when you really love that person, and that person loves you, the same food tastes totally different because there's the personal connection. That's the way it is with everything. And you are given the choice to make the personal connection every day in your relationship with him. And so the time when we sit in the future, having hung in there here, the fact that he serves us to help us hang in there, we're going to find it's all the sweeter. It's all the better. And it's not something, you can give it to the person next to you. Oh, taste this. And it won't taste the same to them because that's just the way it works. If they didn't invest in the relationships, they can't reap the harvest. That's just the way it is. We may all enjoy the same heaven, but we won't enjoy heaven the same. And those who've loved most will live best forever and enjoy it the most forever. So start now. It's a great place to learn. It's a great place to get the blessing. The Lord can't just magically give us stuff when we get to heaven. It has to be stuff that's grown through the times and the choices that are happening right here and now. So hang in there. Not to prove that you're tough, not because you're afraid you're going to go to hell if you don't hang in there. Just hang in there because it's worth it. Life is worth it. Love is worth it. He says, you'll eat and drink at my table in my kingdom, and you will sit on thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. And that's only fitting, because they will judge not like lords. They'll judge like brothers, their own brethren, the tribes of Israel. These Jewish men, these Israeli men will do as the Lord, our brother, has done, judging with mercy and compassion, with understanding of the frailty. And then to help do better. The 12 tribes of Israel. What a crazy family. If you think back of what do you know of the Old Testament, the Israelites were nuts. If they'd had reality TV shows back then, they would have had their own show. Keeping up with the Israelians or something, because there was always one wacky, crazy thing after another. Dysfunctional family. They would have been in jail for some of the things that they did. But the disciples, they had their own fighting. They had their own disputes. They had their own troubles. And when it came to the way things were for Israel and the way things were with the disciples, it's the 12 tribes of Israel. It's like the tribalism of today. It's like all the stuff today over politics and ethnicity and religion and which group are you in and who's greater than who. All of that nonsense that we imbibe in so often here today. The 12 disciples fell. They failed. They fought. And Jesus still loved them, and Jesus still held them. Who better to help the Israeli family out of their stuff? Who better to help us out of our stuff than Jesus, who says, you know what, I'm your brother. I'm brother for all of you. I'm the Son of Man. Don't you make a division where I didn't make a division. I am the son of Adam. Now start learning how to pray. Father, forgive us, feed us, deliver us, the whole family. Hold us, Jesus. And you know he will. And you know he is. He works within you to want to do. And to do his good pleasure. So we'll sing a couple of songs, but I pray that you'd hear his voice. What is his good pleasure for your life today? For the way you talk and the way you act. Let him lead you. You'll never regret it. Let him lead you.
my heart I hear this song of the highway, saying someday soon I'll stand above the clouds. I'll pass through this veil of tears. Your strength will hold me through the years. In barren lands I'll drink your springs of life that flow through everything. Strength behind me, strength before me, strength beneath me if I stand or if I fall. Strength behind me, strength before me, strength beneath me if I stand or if I fall. From strength to strength you call me strength. To strength you call me strength. To strength you call me home. From strength to strength you call me strength. To strength you call me strength. To strength you call me home. You call me home. Strength behind me, strength before me, strength beneath me if I stand and if I fall. Strength behind me, strength before me, strength beneath me if I stand and if I fall. To strength you call me strength. To strength you call me strength. To strength you call me home. From strength to strength you call me strength. To strength you call me strength. To strength you call me home. Step by step. In my heart I hear this song of the highway, saying someday soon I'll stand above the clouds. I'll pass through this veil of tears. Your strength will hold me through the years. In barren lands I'll drink your springs of life that flow through everything. Strength behind me, strength before me, strength beneath me if I stand and if I fall. Strength behind me, strength before me, your strength beneath me if I stand or if I fall. Strength to strength you call me strength. To strength you call me strength. To strength you call me home. From strength to strength you call me strength. To strength you call me strength. To strength you call me home. the song of the highway, saying someday soon I'll stand above the clouds.